but also the fact that there are certain corporate interests of corporations that the government is close to that might be negatively affected if we recognize the fundamental right to privacy of Canadians. So it effectively seeks to say there should be some balance between the idea of protecting people's rights and the fact that, okay, there may be certain large corporations whose interests are involved in or would be negatively affected by recognizing the privacy rights of Canadians. Now, in particular, though, although the bill speaks about a balance at a general level, it is so, to borrow a word from a member opposite, is so flexible that it creates space that you could effectively drive a truck through, and so many different exceptions and exemptions that it's not really effectively protecting the privacy rights of Canadians. A member opposite in the speech just given said that this is a flexible framework. The bill is flexible. Well, flexibility isn't always a virtue, Madam Speaker, and I would say, in particular, flexible for whom? Who is doing the flexing? Who is the one that is able to bend the bill back and forth to their own will and their own interests? And I would suggest to you that the flexing here is not being done by the individual who's supposed to own their own data. The flexing is being done by these corporate interests that the government is close to. Yeah. So even if you believe that this should be a balanced approach, it is not a balanced approach. It is a highly, quote-unquote, flexible approach in which the bending and twisting is done by the particular interest that this government has been and always, I suspect, will be close to until we're able to have a new government in this country that respects fundamental rights, that respects privacy, and that believes in a free, competitive market in which businesses compete instead of where particular corporate friends of the government are protected. I want to draw the attention of members to specific sections in here that identify broad exceptions in the legislation. Section 18.3 allows the organization or business to use a person's information if they have a legitimate reason for doing so. Now that's pretty flexible, Madam Speaker, right? If you want flexible, say we're gonna say you can't use this data in a certain way unless you have a reason to do so. I would submit to you, Madam Speaker, that most people who do things think they have a legitimate reason for them. Others might not think they have a legitimate reason, but to say you can use people's data, there's an exception if there's a legitimate reason why you want to do it, I would say there likely could be no broader conceivable exception than that one. But there are more exceptions, even if that one weren't enough. The legislation, for instance, in section 15.5 refers to implied consent. So apparently, in the case of privacy legislation, consent is not so sacrosanct because companies can interpret an implied consent in this context. So Madam Speaker, there are clear problems with this legislation in terms of the particulars, but I think we can understand broader than the particulars the motivation or the value set which is behind this bill, which is that the government is once again trying to defend corporate interests instead of defending privacy and a genuinely competitive free market. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, and it's disappointing listening to the Conservative now after Conservative stand and say, well, we don't like this, we don't like this. And then now this member made reference to some sort of a Conservative policy platform that might actually be there. We don't know, really, because we often question the lack of any sort of plan coming from the Conservative Party. What we know for fact, Madam Speaker, is that we have substantial legislation that does set the framework, that does protect the privacy of Canadians, that does enable penalties and fines to ensure that there's a consequence when a company breaks its trust with Canadians. That we know. And what do the Conservative Party say? We don't care about this type of legislation because we have our own ideas. My question to the member is, will the member and the Conservative Party not acknowledge that it still is okay to allow the legislation to go to committee where the member can continue to rant on the different ideas, maybe even do something positive, suggest an amendment that he feels would actually make the legislation better?
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, it is quite a thing to be accused of ranting by the member from Winnipeg North, and I am so sorry to have disappointed him by my speech. I recall in an earlier exchange he referred to me as a mischievous little fellow, and I framed that and I put it on my wall, that the member for Winnipeg North thinks I'm a mischievous little fellow. That is truly having arrived. That was the goal I set out to have been thus recognized by that member from the beginning. But he asks what changes I would like to the bill. I suggest that he support changes that reflect what Conservative members have in their wisdom put forward through our policy declaration, which we as a caucus are strongly supporting, which is the idea that there is a right to privacy, a right to digital privacy, and that right comes before the corporate friends of that member and this government.
Yeah.